Obey me or get out. The room went still, as if the walls were listening. The son-in-law's voice cut through the smell of roast chicken and furniture polish. The daughter did not speak. She only folded her hands and nodded, as if someone had placed a small stone on her tongue. The elderly man felt the breath leave his chest. He walked to the hall closet, pulled out the old suitcase with the cracked handle, and packed without looking at his daughter's face. 3 days later, a phone lit up in a dark motel room off the freeway. 11 rows of notifications flashed one upon another. 111 missed calls. His name was Alden Pike. He was 67 years old and had the careful hands of a retired shop teacher. Years of sanding oak and wiping glue off dovetail joints had left his fingertips smooth and strong. He lived most of his life in township schools and small garages, teaching teenagers how to build birdhouses and bookcases and how to measure twice. His wife, Maureen, died 8 winters ago when the snow around their cottage made a muffled silence. After the funeral, Alden sold the cottage and moved to a smaller city apartment near his only child, a daughter named Talia. He told himself that grief would be lighter if he could hear her laugh on a Tuesday or see her lights across the street when the first spring rain tapped the windows. Talia had married a man named Corbin Vale. He was tall, handsome in an intentional way, with hair that never fell out of place and shoes that were always clean. Corbin spoke in a steady tone that suggested he was used to being taken seriously. He called himself a consultant. He wore smooth suits that spoke of meetings and airports. Alden did not judge. He learned long ago that a man could be useful without lifting a hammer. He watched and listened. He helped where he could. He kept the porch light at his apartment on, the one thing he could control, and waited to be useful. In the beginning, Sundays were simple. Talia would bring over a casserole. Corbin would talk about market cycles. Alden would tell a small story about a student who had learned to use a lathe without fear. They would laugh in the same places. Talia would lean her head on Corbin's shoulder. Corbin would rest his hand on her wrist with a gesture that seemed gentle. Alden would wash the dishes and dry them by the window. He saw their reflections, 3 figures framed in glass, and felt a simple contentment that life had not ended with Maureen. It had changed shape, that was all. Cracks began as whispers. Corbin started joking that Alden's apartment smelled like machine oil. He would say it with a smile, and then add a remark about old habits. The smile did not always reach his eyes. Talia would press her lips together and change the subject. One day Corbin asked Alden not to bring over second-hand toys from the thrift shop for their little boy, Merritt. He said it was unhygienic. Alden nodded. He cleaned each toy anyway and left them by his own door. He told himself that being careful was also a kind of love. He told himself that men like Corbin were raised to think in straight lines. Alden noticed other lines, too. There were new rules that did not exist before. Corbin did not like shoes near the entry rug. He did not like unscheduled visits. He did not like Alden's stories running long, even when Merritt leaned forward and asked to hear more. Alden shortened the stories. He kept his shoes in his hands until asked to set them down. He called before walking over with a plate of ginger cookies. He called again if the phone went to voicemail. He learned to wait. He learned to smooth his face into something quiet and plain. The day of the ultimatum began with sunlight that looked kind. Talia invited him to dinner at their house in a tidy suburb outside Columbus. Merritt's crayons were stacked by color in a little plastic bin. The table was set early. The roast chicken was golden, and steam rose from a pot of green beans. Alden brought a small wooden keepsake box he had carved. The lid had a little inlay of a bluebird. He had sanded it until it felt like water under the hand. He imagined Merritt hiding notes inside it when he learned to write. Corbin examined the box and set it down without comment. He then announced that new arrangements were needed. Corbin said that Alden had become a disruption. He said that Talia had enough stress and that boundaries must be respected. He said that if Alden lived in their orbit, he must follow the rules. No surprise visits. No unapproved food. No stories that made Merritt too excited before bedtime. No gifts that were not on the list. Alden stared at the steam from the green beans. He thought of Maureen, who once carved a little heart into the inside of a kitchen drawer where only he could see it. He tried to answer with patience. He asked what had changed. He asked how he could ease the worry. Corbin repeated the words with a new hardness. Obey me or get out. Talia nodded, slow, as if the motion cost her. Alden had never been a man to shout. He stepped into the hall and opened the old suitcase. He put in 2 shirts, 2 pairs of socks, a shaving kit, and the box with the bluebird lid. He took his jacket from the hook and slipped the phone into the inner pocket. He paused by the doorway to look at his daughter. She held her elbows as if the air had turned cold. Merritt stood in the next room, peeking around the door, eyes wide. Alden wanted to kneel, to say that love does not need lists to exist. He feared that saying one more thing would be used as proof against him. He lifted the suitcase and walked out. The motel he found was quiet and smelled of lemon cleaner. He paid cash, a habit learned in a different time. He lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The textured plaster looked like tiny maps. He traced imagined rivers until sleep came. Morning felt like a slow climb. He ate oatmeal from a paper cup and walked to a nearby park. Squirrels darted through bare branches. A boy threw bread to ducks while his mother scrolled on her phone. Alden sat on a bench and tried to name the dull ache that had replaced anger. He went back to the motel at dusk and set the phone on the nightstand. It did not ring. On the 3rd day, the phone rattled on the cheap particle board and lit the room. Missed call. Missed call. Missed call. The number climbed until it felt unreal. 111. The last voicemail badge blinked at him. His pulse quickened with fear. Some part of him wanted to throw on his jacket and run without listening. Another part of him felt a strange, cool steadiness. He thought of the small bluebird inlay, of quiet hands shaping patient work. He turned up the volume and pressed play. A child's voice whispered his name. Then a crash sounded in the background. A second message carried a different voice in a tight whisper that slid into a sob before cutting off. The third message was Corbin, controlled but strained, asking him to call back at once. The last message made Alden grip the side of the bed so he would not sway. It came from a deputy in Franklin County, and it was brief. Something had happened at the house. Immediate contact was requested. The motel room seemed to tilt as if it were a boat on a black lake. He stood, reached for his jacket, and picked up the wooden box with the bluebird lid. The phone buzzed again in his palm. He stepped into the cold night air and looked at the road, long and empty, as if it were waiting to tell him a story that could not be untold. The road to Alder Street held the frozen hush of late autumn. Fallen leaves collected along the curbs, forming small russet drifts that swirled when passing cars moved through. Alden walked steadily toward the house, one hand in his coat pocket and the other carrying the small suitcase he had taken with him 3 days earlier. The sheriff's cruiser parked in the driveway was marked with frost along the windows. A porch light flickered as if the bulb was near the end of its life. The house, once warm with voices and laughter, now looked anxious. Curtains no longer swayed but hung stiff and unmoving. Alden could feel the years pressing against him. He remembered helping Talia hang fairy lights for her 16th birthday. He remembered measuring the living room wall for school photographs. Those memories felt close enough to touch, yet they floated just out of reach. A low anxiety settled in his stomach. Deputy Mason Hart stood near the front walkway with a modest clipboard tucked under one arm. He was a young man with a patient face. His eyes, though steady, showed concern. He offered a gentle greeting before asking Alden to confirm his name. The voice held the careful tone of someone trained not to cause alarm. Alden answered each question with simple clarity. He asked no questions in return. The deputy nodded, then gestured toward the house. He explained that there had been a domestic incident. He stated that no one was in danger now, but clarity was needed regarding certain details. He informed Alden that neighbors had reported raised voices and something breaking. He mentioned that Corbin had made the emergency call, claiming a misunderstanding that escalated. The deputy's words were wrapped in routine procedure, yet Alden felt each syllable land heavily. The house door stood open. He stepped inside. The living room appeared strained. A lamp lay on its side, its shade dented. A ceramic dish lay broken in a scatter of pale fragments near the wall. The air held a faint scent of burnt sugar that suggested the roast chicken from 3 nights before had been reheated to exhaustion. Corbin sat at the dining table with both hands pressed flat against the polished wood. His jaw showed a tightness that had not been there earlier in the week. Talia sat opposite him, shoulders drawn inward, hair untidy as if she had pulled at it in distress. Merritt was nowhere in sight. Alden felt his breath catch. He scanned the room until the deputy lightly informed him that Merritt was safe with a neighbor. The explanation was brief and factual, Yet relief passed through Alden like warm water on cold hands. He lowered the suitcase to the floor. Corbin began to speak quickly. He claimed that emotions had flared after Alden's departure. He described Talia's tears, Merritt's confusion, and the weight of the silence that settled over the house. His tone suggested that all things were inevitable consequences of stress. He implied that Alden's sudden exit had destabilized the family structure. His voice maintained a measured politeness, but his words sounded as though he was arranging stones in a careful line, making the pattern appear neat to the outside observer. Talia said nothing. Her eyes were red around the edges. She kept her gaze fixed on the tabletop. Alden recognized the look. It was the look Maureen had worn in the doctor's office when the prognosis was final. A look that came when holding back an ocean. Alden asked one quiet question. He wanted to know why they had called him so many times. The table fell into silence. Talia's hands trembled. She reached into her cardigan pocket and removed something wrapped in tissue. She unfolded it with slow fingers. A small wooden box appeared. The lid showed the bluebird inlay. A crack ran across the top, splitting the delicate image through the wings. It had been thrown against the wall during an argument. Corbin's face tightened. Talia whispered that Merritt had cried when it broke. The child had tried to repair it with clear tape, leaving plastic wrinkles over the carved surface. Alden lifted the box with both hands. He ran one finger along the crack. His voice did not break, yet it softened in a way that made the deputy look away, granting privacy without moving. Talia began speaking in halting words. She said she had not wanted the confrontation. She said Corbin had convinced her that boundaries were necessary. She said she had believed that structure would help their home feel calm and predictable. She admitted that she had not realized how much her father had withdrawn to accommodate these requests. She said she thought he understood her intentions. Her words came slowly, like small steps taken across icy ground. Corbin attempted to interrupt, but the deputy raised a hand gently and asked him to allow her to finish. Talia continued. She said the silence in the house after Alden left had been unbearable. She said Merritt had asked where Granddad had gone, every morning, and whether the bluebird box could tell him. Her voice wavered again. Tears slipped down her cheek. Corbin exhaled sharply. He said families needed rules. He said households needed structure. He said that if everyone did everything based on emotion alone, then nothing would hold together. His tone carried a practiced certainty. He looked directly at Alden and said the ultimatum had been misunderstood, that it was meant to encourage clarity, not rejection. The words felt smooth, but something beneath them sounded hollow. Alden observed this. He had learned over decades of teaching that a student who sanded wood too quickly would leave uneven grain. Smooth surfaces could hide deep flaws. He said nothing. His silence carried weight. Talia placed both hands over her face. The deputy stood very still. The conversation ended when the deputy explained that no charges were being filed and that he was satisfied no one remained in danger. He encouraged them to take time apart to allow emotions to settle. Alden thanked him. The deputy left. The house grew quiet once again. Talia stepped toward Alden but did not speak. She looked like someone standing on the threshold of a confession. Corbin remained seated, his gaze fixed on a point far beyond the room. Alden held the broken box carefully. He did not raise his voice. He simply said he needed to retrieve something from his former home. He told Talia to rest. He told her to tend to Merritt. He gathered his things and stepped back out into the evening air. A faint breeze moved across the street, rustling the leaves. The house behind him remained tense and still. Alden did not return to the motel. He walked to a small workshop storage unit he had kept after retirement. Inside were woodworking tools wrapped in cloth, jars of neatly sorted screws, and unfinished pieces of maple and walnut. The place smelled of cedar oil and old varnish. He set the broken box on the workbench. He touched the cracked lid with gentleness. The workshop had been his sanctuary long before grief had arrived in his life. He remembered evenings with Maureen sitting nearby, reading aloud as he sanded. He remembered teaching Talia to carve simple shapes. He remembered laughter echoing in the small room. He stood with memories for several minutes before rolling up his sleeves. He worked slowly. He used a small plane to smooth the edges of the broken lid. He used wood glue in careful measure, pressing the pieces together until the crack sealed. He replaced the tape with precision. He polished the surface with a soft cloth until the bluebird shone again, though the faint trace of the break would always remain. The imperfection made it more honest. Alden breathed steadily as he worked. His thoughts unfolded with clarity. He saw now that something deeper had cracked within the family. The damage could not be undone with quick apologies. It would require patience, time, and a different kind of strength. He would not return to the house uninvited. He would not beg for position. He would stand firm without bitterness. The repaired box rested in his hands. He knew what the next days would require. He would seek out his own living space again, small but chosen. He would rebuild his own quiet. He would allow Talia to find her own understanding. He would give Merritt something to remember that did not come from guilt or conflict. The chapter of fatherhood was not finished. It was changing shape once more. The night air outside the workshop felt crisp. A star flickered in the sky, pale and distant. Alden locked the door and walked toward the main road, carrying the bluebird box with steady hands. He did not know that Corbin was already planning something else. He did not know that this conflict would grow before it resolved. The story was only just beginning to turn. The second meeting at the wedding rehearsal dinner eliminated any doubt. Harriet had cornered me by the bar and spent 20 minutes explaining in excruciating detail how their family maintained certain standards and how important it was that Joanna not slip backward financially. The implication was clear. I was the backward slip, the anchor around their son's prospects. But it was the third encounter, a stilted dinner at their home in Evanston 6 months after the wedding, that solidified my understanding. Ambrose had held court at the head of his mahogany dining table, pontificating about fiscal responsibility, while his wife nodded along like a wind-up toy. "You were in real estate, weren't you, Cornelius?" he'd said, swirling brandy in an oversized glass. Must have been quite the adjustment, going from broker to, well, to retirement. The pause before retirement had been deliberate, loaded with condescension. I did well enough to retire comfortably. I'd replied evenly. That was always the goal. Of course, though one wonders about legacy planning, making sure the next generation has proper resources, not just adequate ones. Buford had smirked into his wine glass. Joanna had looked at her plate. I'd finished my dinner in silence and left as soon as politely possible. Now sitting in this cafe with steam rising from my coffee cup, I wondered what spending a week with Ambrose and Harriet would be like. Would they treat me with the same thinly veiled contempt? Or would the beach setting, the vacation atmosphere soften everyone's edges? I took a long sip of coffee. Maybe the trip would give me a chance to observe them more closely, to understand what kind of people had raised Buford. Maybe I'd see something, some crack in their facade that would help me understand what my daughter had gotten herself into. The cafe door opened, letting in a gust of cold air. I pulled my jacket tighter and watched the street outside, planning nothing, just observing. Sometimes observation was enough. April arrived with the kind of warmth that made Chicagoans forget winter entirely. By the 10th, trees along my street had budded green, and people walked without heavy coats for the first time in months. I spent the morning at a department store on Michigan Avenue, methodically selecting clothes for Florida, lightweight shirts, khaki shorts, a new pair of sandals. The saleswoman, a cheerful woman in her 30s, chatted while ringing up my purchases. "Beach vacation, family trip to Miami," I said, handing her my card. "Oh, how lovely. Nothing like family time in the sun." I smiled noncommittally and took my bags. "Lovely. Sure." Back at my apartment, I spread everything out on my bed. The clothes looked foreign somehow, too casual, too optimistic. I'd become accustomed to long sleeves and closed-toe shoes, the practical uniform of Chicago life. These items, bright blue shirt, tan shorts, belonged to a different version of me, one unburdened by family drama. I was folding the shirts into my suitcase when my phone rang. Buford's name appeared on the screen. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won out. "Hello, Cornelius. Just wanted to touch base about the trip." His voice carried that false heartiness he used when pretending to be friendly. "Got your flight info?" "Yeah. May 20th, United Flight 842, departing O'Hare at 2 p.m. Joanna sent me the details last week." Great. Just making sure everything's squared away. Wouldn't want any confusion." He paused, and I heard ice clinking in a glass. "Drinking already? And it wasn't even noon. Few tips for you, old man. Remember to bring your medications." "Yeah, high blood pressure and all that. Humidity in Florida can be tough on folks your age. Maybe pack some extra heart pills just in case." The condescension dripped from every word. "I've traveled plenty, Buford. I'll manage just fine. Sure you will. Sure you will. Just looking out for my father-in-law. The way he said it made the relationship sound like a burden. Anyway, we're all excited. Going to be a great week. Quality family bonding and all that. I'm looking forward to it. I lied. Yeah. Well, see you at the airport. Don't be late. You know how security lines are these days. Might want to get there extra early considering. He trailed off deliberately, letting the implication hang. Considering your age, considering you might get confused, considering you're not quite capable. I'll be there on time, I said flatly. He chuckled. Of course you will. All right. Got to run. Catch you on the 20th. The line went dead. I stood there with the phone in my hand, staring at my half-packed suitcase. His voice echoed in my head. Don't be late. As if I'd ever been late for anything important in my 68 years. I set the phone down carefully on my nightstand and returned to packing. Each item went into the suitcase with deliberate precision, shirts folded, shorts rolled, toiletries secured in a plastic bag. I would be prepared. I would be punctual. I would be everything they thought I wasn't. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally see them clearly, too. The weeks leading to May 15th passed in careful preparation. I reviewed my medications, double-checked my passport, despite knowing it was current, and read reviews of Miami beaches I'd probably never visit. Each day brought a mixture of anticipation and unease, like standing at the edge of something I couldn't quite see. The morning of the 15th arrived clear and warm. Chicago finally shaking off spring's chill. I'd barely slept, too aware of the day ahead. By 7 a.m., I was dressed and ready, my packed suitcase standing by the door like a loyal sentinel. At 9:30, I called a taxi. The driver, a talkative man in his 50s, kept up a steady stream of chatter during the 40-minute drive to O'Hare. I gave him brief responses, my attention focused on the skyline receding behind us and the massive airport complex growing ahead. My phone showed 10:42 a.m. when we pulled up to Terminal 1, United Departures. Have a good flight, the driver said cheerfully as I handed him cash. I pulled my suitcase from the trunk and headed through the automatic doors into chaos. O'Hare on a Thursday morning was a symphony of rolling luggage, gate announcements, and hundreds of travelers moving with urgent purpose. I made my way to the departure board, scanning the listings for United 842 to Miami. 2 p.m. departure. Nothing. I checked again, running my finger down the screen. Los Angeles, Denver, Houston, San Francisco. No Miami at 2 p.m. No flight 842. My chest tightened. I rolled my suitcase to the United counter where a young woman with her hair pulled into a tight bun was helping an elderly couple. I waited, watching the clock tick to 10:56, then 11:13. Finally, she turned to me with a professional smile. How can I help you today? I pulled out my printed confirmation. Joanna had emailed it weeks ago and slid it across the counter. I'm looking for my flight. United 842 to Miami. Departing at 2 p.m., but it's not on the board. She scanned the paper, her fingers moving across her keyboard. The smile faded into something more neutral. Careful. Sir, this flight, it departed yesterday, May 14th at 2 p.m. Yesterday. The word came out sharper than I intended. That's impossible. My daughter specifically told me May 15th. I have the date right here. I tapped the confirmation. She leaned closer to her screen, squinting. I see the booking here, but the actual flight date was the 14th. This ticket shows you were checked in as a no-show yesterday. Her tone shifted to something resembling pity. I'm sorry, sir, but you missed your flight. The terminal noise seemed to swell around me. Announcements, conversations, the endless rolling of suitcase wheels. I stood there with my printed confirmation, proof of nothing, and felt the first cold fingers of realization creeping up my spine. Check again, I said quietly. Please. She did, her expression growing more uncomfortable. Same result, I'm afraid. Is there someone you can call? Family traveling with you? Family? Yes, I had family somewhere on a beach in Florida, probably without me. I stepped away from the counter, pulling my phone from my jacket pocket with hands that felt disconnected from my body. Around me, travelers rushed past with their destination certainties, their correct flight times, their functioning family relationships. I found Joanna's number and pressed call. It rang 4 times, long enough that I started composing a voicemail message in my head, something calm and reasonable, asking what had happened. Then she picked up. Dad, hey. Her voice was bright, almost singing. Too bright. In the background, I heard other voices. Laughter, the distant crash of waves. Joanna, I'm at O'Hare. The flight. They're saying it left yesterday. That can't be right. I have May 15th written down. You told me. Oh. A pause stretching out like taffy, then with an airiness that made my stomach drop. Oops. Your flight was yesterday, wasn't it? Looks like you missed it. Oops. As if I'd forgotten to pick up milk. As if this were a small, amusing mishap. What? I couldn't form more words. My grip tightened on the phone until my knuckles went white. Yeah, we're already here. Got in last night, actually. The beach is gorgeous, Dad. You should see it. She wasn't even trying to sound sorry. There was movement on her end. Muffled sounds, and then laughter. Male laughter. Unmistakable. Buford's voice. Slightly drunk already. Did the old-timer really fall for it? More laughter, deeper, rougher. Ambrose. And a woman's titter that could only be Harriet. Joanna. My voice came out hoarse. Are you telling me you gave me the wrong date on purpose? Oh, don't be so dramatic, Dad. Now her tone shifted to something annoyed, defensive. It was just a mix-up. These things happen. Maybe you should have double-checked your dates. You know how forgetful you can get at your age. In the background. Buford again. Tell him we're having cocktails on the beach. Tell him about the view. She giggled. Actually giggled. Look, we've got to go. Pool bar's calling. Sorry about the confusion. Okay. Maybe next time pay more attention to your ticket. Joanna, wait. The line went dead. I stood there in the middle of Terminal 1 with my phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. Around me, life continued. A child wailing 3 gates over. An automated voice announcing boarding for Seattle. 2 businessmen arguing about a delayed connection. Normal airport chaos. Normal people having normal problems. I lowered my phone slowly and looked at the screen. My daughter's contact photo smiled up at me, taken last Christmas in my apartment before everything fell apart. Before I understood what kind of people I was dealing with. My suitcase stood beside me packed with beach clothes. I wouldn't need sunscreen for a trip I'd never take. Hope I'd carefully folded between each shirt. I'd been so careful, so prepared. I'd done exactly what they'd told me to do. Arrived exactly when they'd instructed, trusted exactly as a father should trust his daughter. And they'd laughed, all of them together, while I stood alone in an airport holding a useless ticket. The realization settled over me like cold water. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was deliberate, calculated, a game they'd planned and executed while I'd spent weeks looking forward to reconciliation. I gripped my suitcase handle and started walking toward the exit. Each step mechanical, automatic. The taxi line stretched long in the pickup area. I took my place at the end and waited, breathing carefully, keeping my expression neutral, even though something inside me was hardening into something new. The taxi ride home passed in silence. The driver, an older woman this time, seemed to sense my mood and didn't attempt conversation. I sat in the back seat, watching Chicago slide by through the window. Familiar streets, familiar buildings, a familiar life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who didn't understand what his own daughter was capable of. We pulled up to my building. I paid, carried my suitcase through the lobby, and took the elevator to my floor. Mrs. Chun from 4B was in the hallway watering her plant on her doorstep. Back already, Mr. Hart. I thought you were going on vacation. Change of plans, I said, unlocking my door. Have a good day, Mrs. Chun. Inside my apartment, everything looked exactly as I'd left it. The breakfast dishes still in the sink, the newspaper folded on the coffee table, the chess set on my side table, pieces frozen mid-game from weeks ago. I set my suitcase down and stood in the quiet, letting the stillness wash over me. Then I walked to my bedroom closet, pushed aside the hanging coats, and knelt by my small safe on the floor. My fingers worked the combination lock automatically, my late wife's birthday, unchanged in all these years. The safe clicked open. Inside were the documents I'd kept for decades. Property deeds, insurance papers, my will, and beneath those newer additions, papers I'd gathered over the past 3 months, ever since I'd started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. I pulled out a manila folder and opened it on my bed. First, printouts from the county assessor's office showing that my house, the one I'd gifted to Joanna, had been refinanced twice in the past year. She'd taken out loans against it, loans I'd never authorized, but that she could legally secure as the owner. Current debt on the property, nearly $200,000. Second, bank statements I'd obtained through connections I'd maintained in the real estate world. Buford's consulting firm had been investigated for financial irregularities 6 months ago. No charges filed, but the complaint documents were public record. Clients claiming improper investment advice, missing funds, pressure tactics. Third, a private investigator's report. I'd hired him in March after that awful phone call where Joanna had hung up on me. The investigator had been thorough. Buford had gambling debts at 3 different casinos. Ambrose had been fired from his banking job years ago for ethical violations, not retired as he claimed. Harriet had been treated twice for prescription medication abuse. And fourth, the email exchange I'd discovered by pure accident. In late March, I'd stopped by the house, my former house, to drop off some mail that had still been coming to my apartment. Joanna hadn't been home, but her laptop had been open on the kitchen table, unlocked. I'd only meant to close it to protect it from their cat, but I'd seen the email preview on the screen from Buford to his parents. The old fool actually thinks we want him on the trip. Flight's the 14th. We'll tell him the 15th. By the time he figures it out, we'll be halfway through the vacation. Joanna thinks it's hilarious. I'd stood in that kitchen, my kitchen that I'd remodeled 10 years ago, reading that email, and something inside me had gone very quiet and very cold. I'd taken a photo with my phone. Then I'd closed the laptop, left the mail on the counter, and walked out. For the past 6 weeks, I'd known exactly what they were planning. I'd packed my suitcase anyway, gone to the airport anyway, played my part in their cruel little theater because I needed them to do it. I needed them to execute their plan, to laugh at me over that phone line, to leave evidence of their malice. I needed them to feel clever and safe and completely in control. A thin mist clung to the street as Alden walked toward Alder Street. Street lamps cast pale amber circles upon the pavement, giving the neighborhood a quiet spectral quality. The houses stood still, windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes. Each step carried the weight of a man who had spent his life giving and had been asked to give up even the right to stand near those he loved. The repaired Bluebird box rested under his arm, light but symbolic. Memories of Merritt's laughter followed him like warm echoes through cold air. The small box had once been a joyful gift. It now stood as a threshold between affection freely shared and affection policed. He approached the house with calm resolve. Emotion moved through him like layered currents. There was grief, but beneath it, a deep, steady purpose had begun to form. Talia opened the door before Alden could knock. Her face was pale and tired, but her eyes were clear. She had crossed an inner threshold already. The living room behind her was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls. Merritt slept upstairs, unaware of the quiet storm in the house. Corbin stood near the dining table, his posture rigid and controlled. His suit jacket hung across a chair, and his collar was slightly undone, as though he had been pacing. The tension in the room was immediate, pressing against the air itself. Corbin spoke first. He said that family order must be restored. He said that decisions regarding Merritt's emotional environment were his responsibility as a father. His voice carried the rhythm of someone who believed logic would triumph over sentiment. Alden listened without interruption. Talia stepped forward. Her voice shook at first, but steadied as she continued. She said she had been speaking with a counselor. She said she had been examining patterns of control and fear in the household. She explained that she could no longer accept decisions founded upon authority rather than compassion. Corbin's expression did not change at the surface, but his eyes sharpened. He replied that she was being influenced, that she was being guided away from reason. He suggested that Alden was encouraging emotional instability. His tone remained measured, but a tremor of anger moved beneath the calm surface. The argument unfolded slowly, sentence by sentence, like a rope being unwound. Each thread revealed more of the truth lying beneath. Corbin then said something that struck the deepest part of the room. He stated that Alden was an outsider to the core of their household, that his influence was unnecessary, and that Merritt needed to learn independence from extended family emotional reliance. The words were precise, yet they cut sharply. Talia flinched. Alden's expression remained composed, but something within him stilled completely. The statement was not merely controlling. It was a rejection of the fundamental bond between grandparent and grandchild. Alden spoke only one sentence in response. He said that a child does not learn independence through isolation. Silence followed the statement. The truth of it hung in the air like held breath. Corbin's voice rose for the first time. He stated that he was Merritt's father and that his decisions were final. He lifted a hand and pointed toward the door, instructing Alden to leave the house permanently and without further contact. The words were not shouted, but they were absolute. Talia's face went white. She shook her head slowly. She told Corbin that he did not have the right to dismiss her father. She said that their home belonged to both of them, and that their child's relationships were not one person's to command. The strength in her voice surprised even herself. There was no tremor now. She spoke with clarity and dignity. Corbin stared at her, expression unreadable. Alden placed the bluebird box on the table between them. He spoke quietly. He explained that he would not respond to threats. He said that love is not subject to permission. Talia's breath caught. Corbin's jaw clenched. The atmosphere shifted. A line that had been implied for months had now been spoken aloud. It left no space for return to the former state of things. Corbin stepped closer, his voice low and intense. He said that if Talia chose to oppose him, then consequences would follow. This time, the threat was not disguised in civility. It hung clearly in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Talia did not step back. She stood her ground. She said that she would not allow her son to be raised in a home where fear directed affection. She said she was not leaving, but she would no longer silence herself. She spoke as someone who had understood her own heart for the first time in years. Corbin exhaled through his nose, a controlled release of rising frustration. The tension in his posture shifted to resignation rather than fury. He picked up his jacket and keys. He told her that he would return when she was prepared to speak rationally. He walked out the front door without looking back. The door closed with a heavy sound that echoed through the house. The quiet that followed felt almost vibrating. Talia's shoulders dropped. She covered her face with both hands and let out a ragged breath. Alden stepped toward her, but did not speak. She reached out and grasped his sleeve, holding on as though anchoring herself. They stood like that for a long moment. The house felt still, as if holding its breath with them. When she lifted her face again, her expression was no longer confused or afraid. It carried sorrow, but also resolve. She said that things could not continue as they had. She said that something needed to change permanently. Alden nodded. He did not tell her what to do. He simply stood with her, steady as carved oak. Morning light filtered through the curtains the next day. The house remained quiet. Merritt ate breakfast at the kitchen table, unaware of the pivotal shift that had occurred. Talia moved through the morning with calm purpose. Alden noted the difference. She was no longer fighting to justify herself. She had stepped into her own voice. He helped clean the breakfast dishes and then prepared to return to the boarding house. Talia walked him to the door. She took his hands. She told him she would consider her next steps carefully. She said she would not allow fear to guide her any longer. Alden kissed her forehead, a gesture he had not offered since she was a child. The act felt like sunlight. Alden walked back toward town with the morning air cool against his face. He knew the conflict was not over. He knew that Corbin would not let go of control easily. But the moment of turning had arrived. The silence that had once protected the imbalance had been broken. Truth had been spoken aloud. There was no returning to the shape the family had held before. Something new would form, though the path toward it would require courage from them all. A message arrived on Alden's phone later that afternoon. It came from a number he did not recognize. It contained only 5 words. "I know what you're doing." The meaning was unmistakable. The line that had once been crossed had now become a boundary that could not be undone. The storm was coming. The message lingered in Alden's mind long after the screen went dark. The boarding house room was still, the soft ticking of a wall clock marking out the seconds. He placed the phone on the table beside the repaired bluebird box and sat down on the edge of the narrow bed. He had known conflict would deepen. He had known that stepping out of silence would invite resistance. The message did not frighten him. It clarified something that had been forming quietly within him for weeks. He no longer needed to prove his place in the family. He did not need to justify the love he held for his daughter and grandson. He understood now that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of truth that would not bend. The room felt calm. The night felt watchful. The next chapter of their lives was beginning to take shape. The following morning, Alden returned to the workshop storage unit. Sunlight filtered through the dusty window pane, illuminating floating specks in the air. Wooden boards of maple and walnut leaned against the wall. Tools rested in their rightful places. This space had been his sanctuary through grief, change, and uncertainty. He ran his hands over the smooth grain of the workbench, as if greeting an old friend. A new sense of purpose moved through him. He began working on a new piece of wood, shaping it slowly with a plane. The curl of shavings fell to the floor in soft spirals. He was constructing a simple wooden frame. It was intended to hold a photograph once the time was right. The frame would be a gift to Merritt one day, a reminder of connection that no threat could erase. Creating something lasting felt necessary. Talia called later that afternoon. Her voice sounded steady but tired. She said that Corbin had returned late in the night, spoken little, and gone to sleep in the guest room without explanation. She said there had been no argument, only a heavy silence that lay between them like a stone. She explained that she had continued writing in the journal advised by the counselor, documenting words spoken, tones used, and moments of emotional pressure. She understood that memory often blurs details during conflict. She wanted clarity. Her voice carried a new firmness. Alden listened as she spoke. He told her that she was not alone. He reminded her that storms do not last forever. She exhaled slowly, as if letting go of something held too tightly. They agreed to meet again soon, when Merritt was present. Corbin's message had implied surveillance, control, or suspicion. Alden knew these tactics. Control surfaces first through rules, then through guilt, then through fear of abandonment. When those methods fail, the final tactic is monitoring or implied threat. He understood that the next steps must be careful, measured, and rooted in stability rather than reaction. He met once more with the family mediator. She explained that documenting behavior patterns was important, not to build conflict, but to protect the psychological safety of those involved. She encouraged structured communication, written messages instead of heated verbal exchanges. Alden agreed. He knew that clarity is not found in noise. He walked out of her office with a slow, purposeful stride. The path ahead remained challenging, but he did not walk it blind. Merritt's next visit to the boarding house garden arrived on a bright morning. The child raced across the grass toward Alden, arms stretched wide. Alden lifted him, holding him close. The laughter that followed was small but full. Talia watched from the bench, her expression a mixture of joy and steady pain. The garden smelled of cut grass and autumn leaves. Merritt soon settled on the ground beside Alden to work on a new wooden puzzle. Alden guided the child's hands with calm patience. They worked in silence, broken occasionally by soft questions. Talia sat near them, watching the scene quietly. The peace that existed in that moment felt like a truth too strong to deny. Love lived here. It did not need permission. It did not need to be defended. Corbin arrived unannounced. His car rolled up to the curb with deliberate precision. He stepped out and approached them with an expression that hovered between composure and contained indignation. He greeted no one. He called Merritt's name, asking him to come. Talia stood immediately, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. Her voice was calm as she explained that they were spending their scheduled time together. Corbin's eyes hardened. He accused her of undermining his role. His words were sharp, polished, and trained to carry emotional weight. Alden did not raise his voice. He spoke with measured calm. He said that Merritt was safe, loved, and understood here. He said that conversation could continue if conducted with respect, not command. Silence fell. The moment stretched like drawn thread. Corbin turned his gaze toward Alden. He asked what his end goal was. He asked whether he intended to interfere permanently in the household. His voice carried accusation and suspicion. Alden answered in a tone so steady that it seemed to settle the air around them. He said that his goal was for Merritt to grow in an environment where love did not need permission to exist. He said that families flourish through connection, not control. The statement did not attack. It clarified. Talia stood beside her father. Her stance was quiet but resolute. Corbin's expression shifted. Anger flickered, then vanished beneath a trained exterior. He took Merritt by the hand and led him to the car. Talia allowed the moment because resisting it would have escalated the scene. The departure felt heavy. The boarding house garden became silent once the car disappeared down the street. Talia sat down heavily on the bench. She did not cry this time. Her silence was not resignation. It was consideration. She told Alden that she had seen something clearly in that moment. She said she had realized that protecting Merritt meant choosing a different path entirely. She spoke of legal counseling, of separation, of creating a household shaped by shared affection rather than monitored loyalty. The words did not come easily, but they came with certainty. Alden took her hand and held it. He did not tell her what to do. He simply said that she was not walking alone. Days passed with quiet arrangement. Meetings with counselors. Discussions about housing options. Planning rather than reacting. The pace was slow, steady, deliberate. Corbin sensed the shift. Messages became urgent. Calls increased. Words changed from reasoning to pleading to anger to silence. Control was slipping from his hands, and he could feel it. But the foundation of the household had already changed. The voice that once silent had found language. One evening, Alden sat in the workshop as the sun lowered beyond the horizon. The wooden frame he had been shaping was nearly complete. The grain caught the evening light in warm ribbons of amber and honey brown. He placed his fingertips on the smooth surface and closed his eyes. He thought of Maureen. He thought of her love that had shaped him. He thought of the child who would inherit that love next. He understood something deeply in that moment. This was not a story of winning or losing. This was a story of refusing to surrender tenderness to someone else's fear. It was a story of holding steady. Talia called later that night. Her voice did not shake. She said she had made her decision. The road ahead would not be simple, but it would be hers. The morning air held a cool brightness as Alden met Talia near the large brick courthouse at the center of town. The building towered in solid calm above the quiet street, its tall windows reflecting passing clouds. Talia stood beside him holding a folder filled with documents. Her posture was straight, though her hands trembled slightly. The decision to begin legal separation had not come in one sudden moment, but through a slow gathering of self-understanding. The counselor had explained each step carefully. Talia had listened, thought, and allowed her mind the space it needed. She had realized that a life built under quiet fear was no future for herself or her son. Alden stood nearby, not as a force pushing her, but as a presence reminding her she was not alone. She looked at him, took a steady breath, and nodded. The solicitor they met inside was a composed woman named Eleanor Graves. She spoke clearly, outlining the legal path towards separating from a spouse whose behavior employed emotional pressure and dominance. The process would require patience. Evidence would matter. Documentation of patterns would help. Talia listened with unwavering attention. She asked questions when necessary, small but thoughtful. Eleanor explained that custody would be considered carefully. Courts examined stability, communication quality, and emotional safety. Talia swallowed, recognizing the weight of what she was undertaking. Alden watched her and recognized the quiet strength she was discovering within herself. The same strength her mother had carried through illness and hardship. The same strength that had lived its way from one generation to the next, waiting for the right moment to stand. Leaving the courthouse, they walked slowly to a nearby cafe. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees. Leaves brushed across the pavement in scattered patterns. Talia held her warm paper cup with both hands, letting the heat steady her thoughts. Alden listened as she spoke about her fears. She worried about what others would think. She worried about the conversations ahead. She worried about Merritt's understanding of the changes unfolding around him. Alden told her that children understand safety more than they understand explanation. He told her that Merritt would feel what was true. He reminded her that providing him with a home shaped by gentleness would teach him that love was not something earned or negotiated. Her breath eased. Her eyes softened. The quiet between them settled into something stable and warm. Corbin's reaction arrived that evening. Talia received a message that held a tone of disbelief, confusion, and rising panic. He asked why she had taken such steps. He accused her of being manipulated. He insisted that the household had simply experienced stress. His words circled in patterns that attempted to pull her back toward guilt and self-doubt. This time, she did not bend. She responded with clarity. She explained her reasons without accusation. She stated her intentions without apology. The conversation remained written, precise, and documented. Corbin did not reply immediately. A long silence followed. Silence can be heavy. Silence can speak more sharply than raised voices. Alden sat beside her on the phone call, offering presence rather than advice. She did not crumble. Days passed with measured steps. Talia began packing small belongings. Not everything at once. Only the essentials. books that mattered, Merritt's favorite blanket, clothes that held comfort. She stored them quietly at Alden's boarding house. Warren and Elsie did not ask questions. They provided space in one of the spare rooms. Merritt came to visit in the afternoons after school. He did not fully understand the shift, but he felt the change in atmosphere. He sat closer to his mother now. He leaned against Alden's shoulder when they carved new toy pieces together. Children understand emotional weather before they understand spoken language. His behavior told the truth. Corbin appeared at the house less often, though his presence lingered in the tenseness of the air each time he entered. He moved through rooms like someone watching for something only he could name. He asked questions in careful tones. He adjusted the position of objects on shelves. He made comments about schedules and routines. Talia responded calmly. She no longer responded with apology or nervous explanation. The difference unsettled him. Control is most fragile when met with quiet clarity. He sensed the boundary forming around her. He did not know how to move through it. The household did not return to its old shape. It could not. One evening, Corbin asked Talia to sit with him at the dining table. His tone was soft. He spoke about the life they had built. He mentioned shared plans and hopes. He spoke of the family they were raising. His voice held sincerity, but beneath it, the old expectation of compliance remained. Talia listened. She did not reject his words. She acknowledged the history they shared. She acknowledged the good moments. Then she explained, with gentle firmness, that love cannot survive when one person must shrink to fit the other's needs. She said she would not erase herself to preserve peace. Corbin's face tightened. His hands curled into fists against the polished wood surface. He asked her to reconsider. She shook her head slowly. The next morning, Talia and Merritt arrived at the boarding house early. 2 small suitcases rested in the car boot. Merritt carried his bluebird box in his small hands. His grip was steady. Alden watched them step across the garden path. The sparrows hopped along the stone border. Elsie stood on the porch and opened the door gently, as if understanding the tenderness of the moment. The boarding house did not feel temporary now. It felt like a refuge. It felt like a beginning. Talia exhaled and looked around the room that Warren had helped prepare. 2 beds, soft blankets, a basket of fresh towels, a small vase with daisies beside the window. Care had been placed into this space without being asked. Corbin arrived an hour later. His car halted sharply outside the gate. The sound of the engine shutting off cut through the calm of the garden. Footsteps approached the door with quick, urgent movements. He knocked, not loudly, but with a precision that carried tension. Talia and Alden exchanged a look of readiness, a look that did not lean on fear. Alden opened the door. Corbin stood there, composed, but his eyes carried the weight of someone whose understanding of the world was being undone. He asked to speak inside. Alden said they could speak on the porch. The air hung still. The world paused. Corbin looked at Talia with a mixture of disbelief and anger. He asked whether she truly intended to go through with separation. He asked whether she understood the consequences. His voice came low, sharp, and wrapped in something brittle. Talia stepped forward. Her voice held no tremor. She said the decision was already made. She said the home she wanted for Merritt must be shaped from steadiness, not fear. She said she would no longer live a life shrinking around someone else's demands. Corbin stared at her for a long moment. His posture sagged. Something inside him understood that the certainty he had held was gone. He looked at Alden. He began to speak, but no words formed. He turned and walked away slowly, as though the ground beneath him had altered. The porch fell quiet again. Alden looked at his daughter. She did not cry. Her strength was real now. The tide had turned. The storm was no longer something to brace against. It was something they had walked through, and the shore ahead was visible at last. The days that followed carried a surprising quiet. The boarding house settled into a new rhythm with Talia and Merritt present. Morning light entered their room, soft and golden, casting a sense of gentle beginning rather than disruption. Merritt adjusted with the fluid resilience that children often display when surrounded by warmth. He helped Alden water the garden and feed crumbs to sparrows at the bird bath. Talia found part-time work at the local library through Elsie's old connections. The space was peaceful and sunlit, shelves of books offering comfort rather than judgment. The world did not crumble. The world rearranged itself into something breathable. Life became slower, but in a way that healed rather than stalled. Alden observed his daughter and grandson settling into this new shape. He understood that the path had been difficult, yet clarity had arrived through it. Corbin's presence shifted to absence mixed with distance. Messages arrived from him, sometimes impulsive, sometimes measured, but always carrying the sense of a man struggling to understand the loss of control. His tone changed from accusation to pleading, then to a kind of sorrow. He asked to speak with Merritt. Talia agreed, but through scheduled visits in public places where neutrality was easier to maintain. The first visit took place in a small park shaded by oak trees. Corbin sat beside Merritt on a bench, speaking quietly. No one intruded. Alden watched from a respectful distance, not as a guard, but as a quiet pillar. Corbin's posture lacked the rigid certainty it once carried. He looked tired, as though he had finally recognized the cost of control upon himself. Talia spoke with Corbin after the visit. They stood near the park entrance, their voices too quiet to draw attention. Alden did not move closer. He understood that this conversation belonged to them. Talia's expression remained calm, composed, and sincere. She acknowledged the years they shared without diminishing the harm that had taken root. She told him that if he wished to remain in Merritt's life, the shape of that role must change. She would not return to a life structured around appeasement. He listened, shoulders lowered. His voice carried defeat, but also reflection. They did not reconcile. They revised. Some endings are not dramatic. Some endings are quiet, deliberate, and honest. Alden felt a sense of release begin to take root inside himself. His relationship with his daughter shifted from one of silent support to one of shared understanding. They spoke about memories, small ones, tender ones. They spoke about Maureen. They spoke about the spaces where silence had once lived. The silence was gone now. Words moved freely. One evening, they sat in the boarding house garden together, the sky tinted lavender as dusk settled. Merritt played nearby, his laughter bright and unburdened. Talia leaned her head against her father's shoulder. The bluebird box rested on the table between them. The faint repaired line along the lid shone gently in the fading light. Talia traced it with her fingertip. She said that the break had become part of the story of the box. Alden nodded. He said that some breaks never vanish, but they become honest. The wooden frame Alden had been crafting in the workshop was now finished. He had polished it until the grain glowed, smooth under the fingertips. One weekend, he and Merritt walked together to a small photography shop in town. They printed a picture taken during a recent afternoon in the garden. The three of them sitting together, sunlight in their hair, a simple joy captured in stillness. Merritt held the frame as though it carried something precious. They placed it on the bedside table in the boarding house room. It was the first photograph of the new beginning, not shaped by loss, but by choice. Spring approached slowly. The cold softened. Buds appeared on the branches of the garden trees. Life did not return all at once, but through tiny, quiet gestures. Talia found a small rental home 2 streets away, painted soft pale green with a little porch and 2 bedrooms. She planned to move at the start of the next month. Merritt visited the empty rooms and ran his hands along the walls, imagining where his toys would go. Alden walked beside them as they explored the new house. It felt humble. It felt gentle. It felt like breathing again. They stood in the small kitchen, sunlight warming the floor tiles. Talia smiled in a quiet way that spoke of steady hope. Alden felt grateful to witness it. Alden did not move with them. He chose to remain at the boarding house, a place that had sheltered the transition with kindness. But he would visit often. The bond between them no longer required proximity to exist. It had become rooted, lasting, and unshaken. Merritt continued to come to the workshop, helping sand new wooden shapes. His small hands grew steadier. His concentration deepened. There was laughter, sometimes soft, sometimes loud. There was no fear that joy would be taken away. The new world held room for it. Corbin remained part of their lives, though not in the same way as before. He attended scheduled visits, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with growing acceptance. He underwent his own counseling, recommended gently but firmly. He did not become an enemy. He became a man learning how to hold love without gripping it tightly. Some people grow slowly. Some people learn late. But learning remains possible. On a warm afternoon near the beginning of May, Alden sat in the garden, watching Merritt chase sparrows near the bird bath. The bluebird box rested open on the table, holding small collected treasures, a polished pebble, a scrap of green ribbon, and a folded note with a child's steady handwriting. The note read, "Granddad, I love you." The sunlight landed across the page. The world felt full, but not heavy. Alden felt no triumph. He felt no need to declare victory. The conclusion of his journey was not loud. It was quiet. It was the simple realization that love does not require obedience. Love survives breakage. It survives distance. It survives silence. When nurtured with patience and truth, it returns. The bluebird on the box shone in the afternoon light. It had been broken. It had been repaired. It had become stronger. The same was true of them. If this story stirred something in the heart, consider staying with the channel for more narratives that honor love, resilience, and the strength found in quiet dignity. Leave a comment to share what stood out most in the journey. Your voice helps others feel less alone. Subscribe to follow the next story, and let this community continue to grow in compassion and understanding together.